Starting with fact number 10, the coldest villages. Because of Russia's harsh winter conditions, I mean like really harsh, it's no surprise that the country is home to the world's coldest village. Winter temperatures in Oymyakon, Russia average 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Oymyakon's lowest recorded temperature is negative 96 degrees Fahrenheit. Living in these extreme temperatures has several drawbacks. Of course, if someone attempts to wear glasses, for instance, outside, the glasses will definitely freeze on their face. So I would have a hard time in that village. Cars must also be kept in heated garages or they are not going to start at all. Moving on to fact number 9, 20% of the world's trees. Yep, it's true. If you enjoy nature, then you're definitely going to enjoy and love this fact about Russia. Russia is home to roughly 20% of the world's trees. This amounts to approximately 604 billion trees. Many of the trees are in far-flung parts of Siberia though, and they are part of remote untouched forests that are too cold for the general public to even visit. The endangered Siberian tigers are also said to be living in these cold forests. So maybe it's a good thing that they live so far out because they are endangered. But now, yeah, they can't be touched. No one's gonna really venture into those cold forests. Next up at number 8, let's talk about folk dancing. Other than nature, Russia is rich in culture as well. Folk dancing is an integral part of Russian history and culture. One of the most popular types of Russian folk dancing is known as khorovod. People dance in a circle while holding hands in this style of dance. Russian folk dances are performed by Russians at festivals, markets, as well as in the theater. If you have the opportunity to visit Russia, definitely it's recommended that you attend a Russian folk dance performance to learn more about Russian culture as well as Russian traditions. This next fact probably doesn't come as a surprise, but Russia is the largest country in the world. Yeah, if we take a look at the land mass of Russia, it is the largest country. Russia has a total area of 17,098,242 square kilometers, which is 6,601,665 square miles. And it has a land area of 16,376,870 square kilometers, which is 6,323,142 square miles. That equates to 11% of the total land mass on the planet. This is great news for travelers though, because it means that there is plenty to see and plenty to do in Russia. Another interesting fact is that Russians do not consider smiling to be a friendly gesture. Not all, but many Russians actually are trained not to smile while growing up because what they perceive about a smile is the opposite of the typical perception of what a smile signifies in other countries. While pretty much the rest of the world thinks that smiling is a good habit and it's a way to spread happiness, well, in many cases, Russians view smiling as a sign of weakness. Russians smile when they see people that they know and care about, but not when they see strangers, as many other cultures do. So definitely be cautious when you visit Russia, because if you're smiling at a Russian, definitely don't be surprised if a smile isn't returned. Next up at fact number 5, we all know this game Tetris, right? Well, many people, even game lovers, are unaware that the game Tetris was created in Russia. Alexei Pajitnov, he created the first version of Tetris for the Electronica 60 computer back in the year 1984. Now, the game quickly gained popularity and spread throughout Russia. By the year 1987, the game had been released in Europe and in North America, and it had quickly become one of the world's most popular computer games. I still think even today, it's very popular. For fact number 4, Russia also has very busy metros. While in Russia, you do not have to worry about local commutes, especially in Moscow. Moscow's metro station is the world's 4th busiest metro station. Only Seoul, Shanghai, and Tokyo have busier metro stations. In Russia, more than 2 billion people ride the metro each year, and one of the best things about Russia's busy metro is that it makes getting around easier for both locals as well as tourists. There are trains to almost anywhere that you could possibly want to go. Moving on to fact number 3, let's take a look at superstitions. Yeah, this is another very interesting and fascinating fact about Russia, is that in general, well, there's a lot of different superstitions and traditions. One of the most common customs is to give flowers only in odd numbers. Many Russians believe that, well, if they're given an even number of flowers, they will take it personally. And in addition to not giving out an even number of flowers, Russians believe that clothing should not be worn inside out. Russians also believe that you will be beaten if you wear your clothes inside out. So if you travel to Russia, keep these superstitions in mind. Also, did you know that Russia has 12 active volcanoes? This is definitely another surprising fact. Of those volcanoes, Kamchatka is one of the most commonly visited due to its accessible location. If you are someone that loves nature and beautiful landscapes, well, you should visit Kamchatka. This active volcano actually has over 1,000 different species of plants, and it's also home to brown bears as well as sheep and wolves. You can choose to visit Kamchatka on your own or go on a guided tour. And if you are unfamiliar with the Russian language, an organized tour is definitely the easiest option for you. Ending this episode off, fact number 1, we have a lot of literature that's found in Russia. If you enjoy literature, you are probably aware that Russia is home to some of the best and most renowned writers. Alexander Pushkin, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, as well as Ivan Turgenev, and also Vladimir Nabokov are among the great Russian authors. Many famous literary writers have museums dedicated to them in Russia, which you can definitely go and visit, and the majority of them can be found in Moscow or St. Petersburg, Russia. Whether you are a fan of their work or unfamiliar with them, definitely visiting their museums will teach you something new about them as well as Russian literature on a whole. Shamil Alayutdinov. Shamil is a theologian, imam, and a mufti, and he was born in the year 1974 in Moscow, present-day Russia. He attended Egypt's renowned Al-Azhar University and has served as the imam of Moscow's Memorial Mosque since the year 1998. He is the president of the Ulema Council of the Spiritual Directorate of Muslims of the Russian Federation. Among Russian-speaking Muslims, Shamil Alayutdinov is regarded as one of the most influential Islamic scholars. He has written several books on Islam, and he is frequently interviewed by Russian and foreign media on various topics concerning Islam as well as the rest of the Muslim world. Number 9 leads us to Marat Khusnulin. Marat Khusnulin is a deputy prime minister of Russia, and he was born in the city of Kazan in 1966. He has a bachelor's degree in economics and a master's degree in professional management. He served as a Minister of Construction, Architecture, Housing and Public Works in Russia from the years 2001 up until the year 2010. In 2010, he was appointed Deputy Mayor of Construction and Urban Development in Moscow, which is a position that he held up until the year 2020. During this time, he really helped the modernization of Moscow, and he was also appointed Deputy Prime Minister for Construction and Regional Development in Russia in January of 2020. From there, let's look at Suleiman Kerimov. He is a billionaire businessman. He's also a social worker and a politician, and he served in the Soviet Army and graduated from Dagestan State University with a bachelor's degree in financial accounting and economics. So this guy, of course, knows his money. Suleiman Kerimov is a shareholder in the Russian bank Fedprom Bank and the oil company of Nafta Moscow. as well as the Russian state-owned gas company Gazprom. And also, he is a shareholder in the bank Saber Bank. Back in the year 2006, he had formed a foundation to run charitable activities, and he also donated $100 million to build the largest mosque in Europe. And he's also one of the world's richest people. He has an estimated net worth of over $21.3 billion. Talgat Tazuddin comes next. He is the main religious leader and the chief mufti of Russia. From 1992 up until 2015, he had been the head of the Central Spiritual Directorate of Muslims, which is the main religious organization of Russian Muslims. He also represents Russian Muslims in UNESCO, as well as the OIC and the European League of Muslims and other organizations. Talgat Tazuddin, he was a staunch supporter, and perhaps still is, of the intervention of expanding Russia's global influence. Like, he even told the Russian president, and I quote, "What we have done in Crimea, we should probably do in Syria and Israel. Let Russia extend to Mecca." Number 6 leads us to Alisher Usmanov. He's also a billionaire businessman, and back in the 1990s, he rose to prominence as a major businessman in Russia with the opportunity to implement a free market economy. He has a net worth that is estimated to be $19.5 billion as of this year, 2022. And Alisher Usmanov is the founder of the global company USM Holdings and the owner of the Russian telecom company Megaphone, as well as the internet company Mail.ru and the newspaper Kommersant. He is also involved in several sports organizations and is the current president of the International Fencing Federation. From there, let's look at Ramzan Kadyrov coming in at number 5. This man is a politician and a parliamentary official. Ramzan Kadyrov is currently the Chechen president and also a major general in the Russian National Guard. Ramzan Kadyrov has been instrumental in rebuilding the war-torn Chechnya. He has implemented some forms of Islamic law in Chechnya, but he's also a very vocal opponent of Chechen separatists. Number 4 leads us to Rustam Minyanov. He was Tajikstan's prime minister from the year 1996 to 2010 and its head of state in 2010. Tajikistan is one of Russia's richest regions, so the republic's head of state holds more power than those of Russia's other administrative regions. Rustam Minyanov has made significant contributions to Tajikistan's economic and technological development. Tajikistan has become one of Russia's leading technological centers under his leadership. In at the number 3 spot, we have Khabib Nurmagomedov. Of course, I couldn't make a list of influential and powerful Russians without mentioning him. Khabib Nurmagomedov is a mixed martial artist, and he is considered one of the best martial artists of all time. He was UFC's lightweight champion and won all of his 29 fights. Now, he retired from MMA back in the year 2021, and yet he was still undefeated. Khabib is the first Muslim to win a UFC title, and he is the most followed Russian on Instagram. And his followers total 33.5 million followers at the time of recording this video. He is regarded as one of the most well-known Muslim athletes in the entire world, and Khabib Nurmagomedov is a practicing Muslim, and he has been very vocal about his Islamic beliefs. At number 2, we have Mintemir Shaimiev. Mintemir Shaimiev was the president of Tajikistan, and he was a member of the Tatar Communist Party and held multiple positions. Back in the year 1991, he was elected the president of Tajikistan and voted in favor of Tajikistan's independence during his reign in a referendum. With Mayor of Moscow, Yuri Luzkov, he formed the United Russian Party, which is now the ruling party of Russia. In the year 2010, he resigned as head of state, but remained with the government as an advisor. Ending this episode at number 1, we have Ravil Gaineddin. He is a theologian, an imam, as well as a mufti. And since the year 1996, he has been the Grand Mufti of Russia, and currently he is the spiritual admin. Ravil Gaineddin is regarded as the most powerful Russian Muslim. He has close ties to the Kremlin and is well known among Russian Muslims. he is a big supporter of peace between Christians and Muslims. So there you have it, guys. This was a look at 10 of the most influential Muslims from Russia. Definitely the population of Muslims in Russia is increasing with every passing day. And if this trend does continue, Muslims' influence in Russia will grow even more. It'll be definitely interesting to see what kind of socio-political changes occur in the world's largest state as a result of this. Starting with Mother Russia. So at the time of filming this video, the population of Russia is 143,388,252. Russia's military is currently ranked second in the world next to the United States of America. The total available manpower for Russia's military is 70 million. And there are a total of 766,055 active frontline personnel. On top of that, they have 2,485,000 active reserve personnel. A military reserve force is pretty much a military organization that comprises of people from a country who combine their military role with their personal careers. And their main role is pretty much to be available if any time the army has to mobilize and they have to go out and fight. In terms of the land systems, we gotta take a look at the tanks, the armored vehicles, and things like the rocket launcher systems. Russia's military has a total of 15,398 tanks, armored fighting vehicles total 31,298, and multiple launch rocket systems total 3,793. So now we take it from the land up to the sky. Total aircrafts for Russia is 3,547. 1,124 of those are transport aircrafts, and a growing fleet of attack helicopters and fixed-wing attack aircrafts. Now we could talk about the frontline personnel, we can talk about the aircrafts and all the land military systems that Russia has. But of course, everything comes with a price, and the financials actually play just as important of a role in military combat as does an aircraft. Russia's total defense budget is 46,600 million. Now, more recently than not, the Russian Federal Treasury did confirm that Russia's defense budget was cut by 25.5% for the year 2017. This reduction is Russia's biggest cut to their military budget since the early 1990s. This reduction follows a long period of time of large increases to Russia's defense spending, which grew by an average of 19.8% since the year 2011. But despite this cut, the 2017 budget remains about 14.4% higher. The Russian government had initially set out plans to reduce the defense expenditure in the draft of the three-year budget for 2017 to 2019, and that was released on October 26, so we knew there was some sort of cut coming. But Russia has learned over the years how to mobilize their army a lot more efficiently, as well as focus on the most important aspects of their military. Lessons learned from experiences in Ukraine and Syria are also being integrated into Russia's military as it develops more and more. However, the Russian armed forces are still largely in an experimental phase. The modernization of Russia's military has yet to reach certain crucial parts of their military, but in some important areas like nuclear weapons, air defense, and long-range guided missiles, Russia has invested a lot of capital in those areas, and yeah, we see the results. There was a military reform that was launched by Defense Minister Anatoly Serdyukov, and that began just a couple of months after the triumph in August of 2008, where Russia was at war with Georgia. At that time, the Russian command control communications and intelligence did not perform very well at all in that battle. Russian communication systems were outdated, even certain essential equipment like GPS systems and precision-guided weapons couldn't even be used. But Russia's defense minister at the time, Anatoly Serdyukov, was replaced in November of 2012 by Sergei Shoigu, and he helped in correcting a lot of the mistakes in the military reforms and shifted the focus to combat training. And we saw the results of the improved combat training that the Russian military was receiving in 2014 when we saw Russia take control of the Ukraine territory, Crimea. But as I mentioned before, several key elements of Russia's military still have not been touched by an ounce of modernization yet. We already had taken a look at a brief summary of what Russia has in play in terms of their military personnel and equipment that they have. But now we've also seen how Russia has been struggling with getting their military up to par. Despite that, they're still the second most powerful military. So if Russia could be conquered through a military strike, how could this actually happen? One thing to note, Russia does reserve the right to use nuclear weaponry, even in regional conflict scenarios. And clearly, Russia is a massive country in land size. Its territory covers more than 1/8 of the Earth's inhabited land area and stretches across 9 different time zones. Even with 143 million people living in Russia, there simply is way too much land to seize and control all of Russia. However, this could happen if China mobilized half of its population and sent them to cover the wilderness of Siberia. It's also estimated that the United States would need 500,000 troops in Afghanistan to secure the whole country of Russia. But just to give you an idea of how guarded Russia is, it borders 16 other countries. It would also be next to impossible to neutralize any of Russia's nuclear capabilities. This is because Russia possesses what they call second strike capability. Second strike capability is a country's capability to respond to a nuclear attack with a powerful nuclear retaliation of their own. It's estimated that Russia possesses 4,300 nuclear warheads, 700 strategic warheads, and 2,000 non-strategic warheads in storage. Now, I mentioned before that Russia borders 16 other countries, so depending on where the attack is coming from, you got a lot to go through in order to get to Russia. However, despite that, Russia's borders are pretty indefensible. There are no natural obstacles like mountains and huge lakes that would hinder any sort of military advance. Historically, however, every major advance that threatened Russia's existence, from the Poles in 1610 to Hitler in 1941, those attacks came from the northern European plain. So if a country wants to launch a military attack on Russia, that's probably the best place that they can launch the attack from. This is why Joseph Stalin, after World War II, was very keen on seizing Central Europe. And the current president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, he said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the country. Russia also has very weak allies like Belarus and Kazakhstan. There's also India and China, but you can hardly call those countries allies to Russia as well. But as it stands, Russia's closest relationship with any major country in the world right now is India. Nevertheless, Russia in and of itself is a very mighty country, a country where people, despite certain global criticism, still push forward to creating a more modern and progressive future.
As for Moscow, it is a city that was formed between 2 rivers, the Moscow River and the Naglanaya River. And according to archaeologists, they say that the region was inhabited by settlers approximately during the 2nd millennia. Now, these settlers were primarily fishermen and hunters, which later on became Slavic tribes that settled the land. Now, currently it's unclear when Moscow had its city founded, but many historians dispute the fact that the city was established by Knyaz Oleg of the Novgorod in the 9th century. But officially, this region was known as the Moscow River, which was incorporated in the Rostov-Suzdal Principality, which was one of 7 principalities that succeeded the Kievan Rus Federation, which was approximately in the 11th century. But the first official mention of Moscow or Moskov was in the 12th century. This was near the end of the Kievan Rus Federation when its principalities were becoming separated. And during this time, Knyaz Yuri Dolgoruki fortified the town with a timber fence and a moat. And in 1147, it is marked as Moscow's official year of existence. And the reason for this is because Yuri Dolgoruki met with Svyatslav Oglovich, stating for him to come meet him in Moscow, which again was a small town in the western border of the Vladimir Suzdal Principality. Now, one thing that was a problem at this time is that the whole region was pretty much a bunch of different towns. And during this time, Yuri had constructed wooden walls around these settlements after executing Stefan Ivanovich, who the towns belonged to, in order to create a fortified position. But why the name Moscow? Well, as you already know, Moscow had many different names before it, such as Moscow River, and even before that, it was known as Kuchikov. But for the name, historians are unable to find the linguistic origins of the word. However, it is hypothesized that it comes from Finnish origins, meaning current, foggy, twisted, and crooked. That doesn't sound too appealing. But in the first half of the 13th century, things in Moscow changed. It was because of Alexander Yaroslavich Nevsky, who founded Moscow as a princely dynasty, transferred his possession of the city to his son Danil, or Daniel. And it was around that time the emblem of Moscow was created. As well, it was decided that George the Victorious, which was the guardian angel of its founder Yuri, was to be the official emblem of Moscow. As well, the future Daniel princes would be named after Yuri in his honor. Now, in 1326, there was a major occurrence in Moscow, which was the relocation of the metropolitan bishop. Because of their move from the city of Vladimir to Moscow, Moscow became a very influential and religious city. But by the 15th century, Constantinople was captured by the Turks. This caused the Russian metropolitans to become elevated to the throne, which then furthered Moscow's importance within the entire country. And throughout all these years, Moscow had a very uneasy history. For example, in 1238, Moscow was nearly burned to the ground by Khan Batu and his Mongolian forces who sieged the city. As well, in 1365, another large fire took place, nearly destroying the city once again. And between 1368 and 1370, the Lithuanian Knyaz Algirdas attacked and sieged Moscow between these years, with Dmitry Daniskoy and his army protecting Moscow from these expanding invaders. And by 1380, Dmitry united Russia's army and led victory over the Tatar Mongols in the Battle of Kulikovo. However, 2 years later, in 1382, Khan Tokyamish of the Golden Horde and the Tatar Mongols attacked Moscow yet again. And after 3 days of siege, Dmitry unfortunately surrendered when his brother-in-law opened the gates of the city, allowing the city's inhabitants to be massacred. Now, during the reign of Knyaz Ivan III, Moscow was established as the capital of the Russian state. And this was all after Ivan had pushed back the Mongolian horde, freeing northeastern Russia, returning it back to the country. Now, it was during this time that Ivan had the idea of making Moscow Third Rome. And this was after he married the niece of the last Byzantine emperor, Sophia Paleologina, which at this time the two-headed eagle, which is a very Russian symbol, started appearing on the princely seals. And no sooner after all of this is when a lot of the construction for a lot of the famous buildings within Moscow started to begin. And considering we're talking about that, let's talk about one of the most important ones, and that is Red Square. Now, the thing about Red Square is it's had a lot of different name changes throughout history. For example, in the 1500s, it was called Veliki Torg, which meant Great Market, or simply Torg, which was also Market. And it was also called Troitskaya, which was named after a church in the area, which was unfortunately destroyed during the Tartar invasion in 1571. After that, the square was known as Pozar, which meant burnt, and around 1661 to 62, it got the name Krasnaya, which meant red. As well as during 1601 to 1603, Moscow was one of the biggest places that was hit by the Russian famine. It is assumed that within Moscow, this famine killed approximately 100,000 people within the city, which was also one of the worst times within Russia as they lost approximately a third of their population. And scientists believe that the famine itself was due to the 1600 volcanic eruption of the Peruvian volcano Huayna-Patina. However, guys, that is just us looking a little bit at the history of Moscow because, to be honest, there is so much history about this city, we'll probably get that in another episode. But as of today, the population of Moscow sits at roughly 12.5 million people as of January 1st, 2017. And as of 2016, it is home to the largest tower in all of Europe. This is the Federation Tower, but its East Tower, more specifically named Vostok Tower, has 95 floors and stands at 1,227 feet. And currently, it battles for the 37th tallest building in the entire world. But although the city has had a history of conflict, it's also had a history of peace. And one of these moments in history was a festival that Moscow hosted. It was during the end of the Soviet Union, being called the Moscow Peace Festival, happening Happening on August 12th and 13th of 1989, they had American bands like the Scorpions, apparently Bon Jovi, Ozzy Osbourne, and this was a concert in order to promote peace within the country. It was held in the what is now known as the Luzhniki Stadium, having over 100,000 people attending, and was one of the most influential glam rock moments in human history. And speaking of festivals, we can't forget about talking about the City of Lights in Moscow because it's one of the coolest. It is a light show that shows historical moments and of course entertaining images, thousands of lights being displayed on Moscow's historical buildings. And in 2014, it won the best cultural show within all of Russia, and in 2015 it had the Guinness record for having the largest projected image, and within the same year it won the City Festival of the Year. And of course, to finish it all off, Moscow is home to two of the most important UNESCO zones in history. And one of the biggest is the Moscow Kremlin, which is the world's largest medieval fortress. The word Kremlin means fortress inside a city, and it was built in between the years of 1482 to 1495. A major piece of architecture that definitely stands within the center of Moscow, and as well keeps track of the city with its 25-ton clock, with the clock's rim, numbers, and hands being covered in 28 kilograms of gold.